Great. It's mutual.
Never okay. Never okay.
Yeah. Saturday morning.
I had started. Oh, me too, me too. No, that's
Yeah.
good. Oh, that's right. It isn't. Everybody. Okay.
Anyway, no. But I think it's
It's in the notes. It also. Yeah, I forgot about it now. Oh, your sash. The sash.
I think I'm presenting like. Thank you. Oh, shit. I didn't see you there. Yeah. It also allows like records on time.
Yeah, that's true.
Ain't no way. Well, you. Okay.
It's like there's no way.
I was thinking about you.
I guess. Yeah, I was being. And then I had that speaks. I gotta touch the moon. Yes. Instead of. That's it. Oh. I think she's gonna tell you that. Last week.
know this. I don't know that. It's in the one. They have to, I don't know. Yes. Yeah. I don't even think so.
It did. Right. That's why that says. Get started in 5 minutes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
All right, I guess we're gonna get started soon, right? You guys ready to get started, or you got your pizza, your drink? All right, it's only you and me today, so.
That's right.
All right, so.
You're welcome.
This is gonna be a fun presentation. I'm excited to do this. I actually presented this on a webinar about a month ago for the Social Enterprise Alliance. And I'm trying to, again, I'm gonna try to, to tell you what things I think about impact entrepreneurship, but if you have specific questions or anything, please, let's make this interactive. I don't want to, it's not a lecture. This is really more about hopefully showing you some, options or ways that you also want to create an impact in your startup and what you're trying to do. There are a lot of ways to do this. Yeah, so I think you all have kind of met me. I work with Wade at the Institute. I also do some other things. Founded my own company called Impact Innovator, which is made to advise impact-driven startups in terms of building impact strategy. Because a lot of people are talking about impact today, impact left and right, and ESG and all this stuff. But how can you easily kind of build the story around your impact? So thinking about the workshop last week, that that great presentation about storytelling. How do you really present your startup as an impact startup to impact investors, to potential partners or stakeholders? And there are some, I'm going to talk about some easy way to do that, and some easy ways to also measure that impact and talk about it. So also going to talk about pitching today, pitching in the context of an impact company, which I think is also relevant to what we talked about last week and what you're going to be doing next week for the team's pitching at the Simpson Innovation Challenge. It's going to be a little similar to what we talked about last week, but I think it will be a great reminder as you're getting ready for your pitch next week. And also connect. I know we have some sessions Monday to practice, but if you want to connect with me between now and Monday or in the next few days on Zoom, let me know. I'll make time available if you have questions for your pitch. So what is a social enterprise? So that's like a $1 million question in a way, but a lot of people get confused by the word social enterprise. Actually, the reason why I call my company Impact Innovator, and a lot of things I'm posting on social media, I talk about impact entrepreneurship because I think a lot of people outside the world of social enterprise think of social enterprise as the social impact, meaning helping people, but it's much broader because it can be about environment, it can be about other things. So social enterprise, in my opinion, is really an organization where the mission is if not more important than profits, right? So triple bottom line, people, profit, planet, for example. That's kind of the reason why this organization exists, is because there is an impact that they want to drive behind it besides the profit. I'm a big believer in the power of business principles and methodology to lead to success. So in the nonprofit world, people may react, as thinking business is evil, making money is bad. I really don't think that. I think using business foundations and some of the things many of you are learning as you're part of the College of Business here, I think are very essential things that are going to be very helpful later in your life. I have an MBA myself. I did marketing for a long time, and frankly, marketing skills are super helpful in a lot of the work I do today. So I don't see, right, that kind of like, having a more capitalistic approach of thinking, hey, we need the money. I think that's a good thing that, there are ways to generate revenue. And so the question, right, that people ask me all the time, do I do a nonprofit? Do I do a for-profit, right? I remember one of the teams here, right? And I was like, do not do a nonprofit. First thing, if I say one thing, is like, I do not recommend create a nonprofit organization. Now, I'm not saying it would be the answer 100% of the time, but when I have people coming and saying, well, I want to do something good, so it's a nonprofit, I want to give back, and I'm like, yes, but there are a lot of pros and cons either way. A lot of nonprofit organizations do not, or they really underestimate the competition on fundraising potentially. And the fact that because if they don't use the business mindset that you are doing in your for-profit companies here, that what you're learning when you do business model canvas and all this stuff, right? A lot of people start a nonprofit like a hobby, right? Like, oh, it's good. I'm a good person. I'm gonna succeed. Not quite, frankly, right? And what happens is you end up with, in your neighborhood, 5 organizations, nonprofits are trying to save dogs. Great. So, okay. So in the free market, you would typically not see this kind of situation. And then what happens is they're going to be like, well, I'm saving the dogs, so I deserve a grant. Well, these other 5 organizations also go for the same grant. So there is a lot of competition. And then because a lot of nonprofits are in survival mode, trying to raise grants, they also can't afford to pay talent, like the right talent. They, so there are a lot of downside with nonprofit organizations. Some of them that are successful have actually developed social enterprises like Goodwill, the food bank, right? I mean, Goodwill is a very good example of a nonprofit social enterprise, and the stores and all that stuff. So I'm not saying it's impossible to start and create an amazing nonprofit organization, but if you have the mindset of, a lot of people going into nonprofit, I think your chances of success are probably a little bit less than if you're starting a company with what you're learning in this incubator, which is, business model canvas, build a strong business case, but a big part of what you're doing is going to be creating impact. I think this is probably the better way to go about it. I'll give you another example that I just talked about to another team today. So I had a group in the Inland Empire call me a few months ago because they were saying, well, a lot of the diabetes drugs are being made in India. They come to the US, the insurance companies jack up the price, and then, if you have good insurance, you're going to get your medication at a reasonable price. But people like homeless, they can't get that medication. They have to use other, they can afford it and stuff. So we want to do something good. We want to have this medication subsidized and available to homeless people and other people who can afford it. So they had created a nonprofit organization, and they invited me to talk to their board. And actually, I almost got kicked out of the meeting by 2 board members because I came in and I said, I think you should consider building a for-profit social enterprise. And they're like, no, what about nonprofit? Are you kidding? I'm like, no, but think about it. If you bring this medication to the US, you can probably sell it. If the financials make sense, you can probably sell it at a price that a lot of people can afford, $30, $50 a month to get this great medication. And yet you can serve an audience like the homeless, can't afford anything. You can give it to them for free. But if you can figure out a way to break even on the ones you're selling, then you can subsidize and still have kind of a mission and almost a nonprofit piece that's giving things away, right? But if you build it that way, you're running a business that's going to generate profit and going to be more scalable and sustainable, right? So again, I think sometimes it's just educating people about the fact that the two can coexist. And I really, again, truly believe that no matter what, I think we said that in one of our sessions, it's like, the first thing you got to do is figure out a way to generate revenue and profit. Because even if you're mission driven, if you can get to that, you know, you're not going to go anywhere. And again, based on my experience, a lot of folks go into nonprofit thinking, oh, you know, it's great, we're going to get donors, grant, you know, people are going to support us. It's a lot of time much harder than it sounds. So that's, you know, again, a lot of my work. I mean, I also work with nonprofits at the moment. We have an accelerator program at UCLA with undergrad economics students helping nonprofits build these plans for enterprise. We also have an accelerator in Orange County where we're working on implementing some social enterprises, whether it's a week store for cancer organization. That's going to be an online store, not just for cancer patients, but also for anybody who needs to read, to, you know, music curriculum and how to monetize some of the great work that one of these organizations does. So there are a lot of ways to think outside the box. And I'm going to give you also some example of how, so first I'm going to go back to this framework. So do many of you know this? Have you seen the Sustainable Development Goals at all? Yes, and it's okay if you haven't. But the first thing I tell startups who want to solve a bigger problem in the world is like, let's make sure you're aware of this and that you've seen this and how you can map out to this. Because I think if you align your startup with one or more of those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that brings a lot of credibility, you know, in calling yourself an impact company. So those are 2030 goals. If you go on the website for the United Nations, they have a lot of sub goals. So each one has sub goals and, you know, measurement, a lot more detail. The bad news is that on most of these, the original goals won't be achieved. So they are also the conversations about, you know, well, there's an urgency behind this. How do we solve all this? But some of them, you know, education, I know some of you here are solving some problems, right, related to climate or other things. On hunger, I was working with a startup that got a lot of funding from the government actually, but they were building an app where a lot of the surplus food was coming in trucks where people could track where the truck is going. So they could go get the surplus food. Because when you talk to food experts, you know, really they will tell you the problem is it's not that we don't make enough produce and such. It's just it's not distributed efficiently. So some people can access food, but it's not like a supply issue. It's really a distribution issue, right? So this company was solving that problem. They're trying to make it easy for people to locate that extra food and go there and find it. Real estate fund. So there is a nonprofit organization called American Family Housing, and they were developing a for-private fund. So again, it was for-profit based, but the idea was that people will invest money and get a return. And what they did is buy large buildings that can house Section 8 voucher families. So if you don't know what Section 8 is you know, based on your level of revenue, you can get these vouchers from the government that would allow you to pay for your rent. And when you think about it from a business standpoint, it's actually a very great source of revenue if you're a landlord, because the government pays basically for this tenant to pay your rent. But most landlords won't accept Section 8 vouchers because they are thinking, oh my God, like my tenant has Section 8, like, oh, they must not be great people, they don't have a good job or whatever. So this organization, you know, gets these places in apartments, use Section 8 voucher tenants, but also provides some additional services, because as you can imagine, sometimes there is this bad cycle of, you know, it's not just about homelessness, but a lot of them, you know, homeless suffer from mental disorders or PTSD. So you also need to allow them, right, to have exposure to, or, you know, help from other services. But from a pure business standpoint, again, it's actually very limited risk because the money from the government is going to keep coming. So they were actually building an $80 million fund or so in Orange County, basically saying if we can buy 5,000 units, we could potentially put an end to homelessness in Orange County. So it's pretty amazing, right, when you think about it. And the idea is, as an investor in that fund, you still get a fairly decent return on investment, 8 to 10% or whatever it was at the time, but it's not bad, right? So the idea again is, still solving a very big social problem, but from a for-profit, revenue generating activity. So those are just examples of me that speak to you a little bit. There are many, many ways you can do impact and social enterprise in a company. Can be one of those or many of those in the same company. Giving back. So that's the one that I'm actually the least, I'm not a super big fan of the giving back thing. And I'll tell you why, because, right, I saw founders before, they'll say, well, we'll give 5% of our profit to whatever nonprofit organization. I'm like, yes, that's good intention. But for me, it perpetuates the nonprofit thing a little bit. So again, I'm not trying to be extremely critical here, but I think there are other ways that, like I said, the subsidizing one, or I'm not going to go through all of them, but supply chain has been, there are organizations, for example, they make product, homeboy industries, right? For example, that's one of those I know is direct employment, right? So underserved. Go ahead.
Is it still okay for the home company to source communities themselves and maybe give to those communities directly?
Yes. I mean, and again, even giving some of your profits, it's a good start. I don't want to tell you like this is a bad idea, but I think there are ways, and there is also the, the buy one, give one, like the Tom Shoes original model, or which by the way, they went away from. I don't know if you know that, but I think part of it was they realized that by giving away that extra pair of shoes to third world countries, for example, was actually cannibalizing or jeopardizing some local sellers and makers. So, right, so it's hard, right, in our world, because you're trying to do something good and then you're like, oh, maybe some of it is not that good, right? So it's all about figuring out, is what we're doing reasonable or in line with our mission? But yeah, so the employment one is also a common one. So I was working with the manufacturer of clothing, a lot of lounge, sleepwear type of products. They were making the product in India with women rescued from trafficking, and the product was sold, right? So they were really using, direct employment of either, population at risk, or the shared ownership is a very interesting one too. I saw a documentary on Chobani a couple of years ago. So Chobani is an example, I think, where the employees typically get shares of the company. So the founder of Chobani, who's a really good social entrepreneur too, was talking about, how he's passionate about doing that. So there are, again, a lot of ways to do social or impact enterprise. And you can look at what may work for you, or, I really think all this is really about abundance mindset. So I know this is a business school, but, I think one thing I learned in my, almost 30 years of business career is the human component, and really the, thinking about abundance, and we can really have it all, right? We can have good businesses, profit, running companies, making money, but also doing good in the world. I think it's really what we need to stand for. And I know your generations are really about that, which I think is needed. I'm excited about the future, because it's really all it is about. It's like, how greedy do we have to, how much profit do we need to make? When we can save other people's lives, when we can educate children who don't have access to education, right? I think the research shows that this is what makes people feel good. It's not the accumulation of wealth or stuff, right? Like, we all want to have a purpose. We want all to have a contribution to the world. So I think there is really a great way to do this, to doing business. And so before I kind of go over pitching and everything, I also wanted to say in terms of investment and capital, like how do you find money when you're a social enterprise? One of the bigger issues or challenges is that when a startup is kind of taught to pitch or go to an investor, usually there is this whole conversation about exit strategy, right? So it's like, well, you know, how is the investor going to make money? How long, you know? And one of the challenge to me with impact is actually exit strategy can be a problem in the sense that the last thing you want to do if you build an amazing impact startup is to be acquired by someone who's going to kill your impact. There are a few case studies, and I don't know them very well, or you know, by heart to tell you where to find them. But there's like a beverage company in Brazil, for example, that got acquired by Coca-Cola, or you know, I shouldn't say names here, but like you know, one of those big beverage companies. And again, you know, once they got acquired by a bigger group, it's like, well, now you were going to follow our corporate BS, basically, right? So that is why I also tell impact companies, look, you need to go to impact-driven investors, impact-minded investors who understand, one, that their return on investment is typically going to be a little lower, or what we call patient capital. So it may take also longer to see their return, but they have an interest in seeing the impact, right? So they are going to say, look, I still make a return and I make an impact. So for these people, that's what they may be looking for. And whether there is, you know, an exit or not, I mean, I also believe in building strong companies, not necessarily unicorns or companies that are going to be valuated at, you know, billions of dollars. But so there are more and more groups, impact investors. Some of them are really about clean tech climate, others are about minority founders. So also women founders are getting more and more attention, and it's needed. Minority founders. So you may also be able to get support when people see that they have an impact in helping you, if you're a founder who started, you know, not with a lot of resources or something, but they know you will have a major impact. And that's what I believe in, really leveling the playing field for anybody from any background. If they have a great idea and the potential for impact, like how do we help these founders be successful, right? And access the right resources, the right capital. It's very, very important. So, I mean, I know I think we had a session about capital, but right, like it's traditionally the same things, you know, angel impact investor, crowdfunding can work well because some of this stuff appeals to the large population. If you have a big impact, potentially you may be able to get a lot of people on your end to say, yes, I want to be part of this. You know, accelerators, there are not a ton of impact-driven accelerators. So there is Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, Lacey, in Los Angeles, who's fairly good in terms of clean tech. They have great advisors and investors as well who are looking for this kind of companies. So I would also try, if you're trying to go to an accelerator or an incubator, and if you're all about impact, trying to target these programs who are a little bit more specific, where again, the advisors, investors are understanding, you know, the kind of dilemma. In the developing world, a lot of people talk about microfinancing, and I think here we have also a program in Kiva. I haven't been part of that or haven't seen it, but Kiva is known for doing a lot of these loans to, you know, the story of you can give $100 to a woman in the Philippines, and she's building a huge company that's going to hire like half of the population in her town. I mean, these are real stories. Of course, in the United States here, you're not going to go very far with $100, right? But it's very similar to the idea of, you know, you can give an entrepreneur a little bit of funding that's going to really propel them to the next level. I think, again, one of the challenge in the United States is that a lot of, you know, wealthy individuals and investors are between charitable donations and very much for-profit investing. And so that's what also the barrier we're trying to break. People like me who are really advocates for social enterprises also making a case for the fact that part of these charitable donations could be much better used to fund impact companies, right? And more generated capital, because if you give a lot of the capital to the nonprofits, as I said earlier, and you ask them, what is your sustainability plan? Basically, their answer is going to be, well, I hope you're around next year to make me the check again. Not a great, right, business model. So more and more foundations are getting into it too, because they have ways called program-related investment, mission-related investments, to start investing in more for-profit companies. And CDFIs, I'm not an expert at that either. I'm not going to get into details, but those are, there's a couple in LA, there is opportunity funded, one called Red F, that supports impact startups by loans. So if you have a company and a lot of what you do helps hire underserved population or population at risk, they will give you like a 3-person loan, which is really not bad at all. So CDFIs can also help, but we don't have that many of them in Southern California. Of course, if you have, grants, donations, that's the other distinction I should have made earlier between nonprofit and for-profit is, if you're a for-profit, you can attract investment capital and investors, which you cannot do in a nonprofit, right? So I was talking to this organization earlier today. They are setting up solar panel manufacturing entities, and they're trying to target nonprofit organizations, but upfront investment is like $3 million. I'm like, you know how many nonprofits can afford that? Probably can count them in Southern California and fingers. But I was asking them, I said, well, at some point, you may want to consider becoming a for-profit social enterprise, because then you can attract capital in the form of investment. And give up some equity or something if you need more money for running operations. To me, that's one also of the biggest advantage of being a for-profit social enterprise, is having access to that kind of capital. Any other questions? Hope I'm not like throwing too much information at you. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears a little bit, talking again about the pitch. I know we talked about pitching last week, but I have a more, a less maybe fun approach or more traditional approach to pitching, but I wanted to make sure that we talk about that and in the context of impact. So why work on your pitch, which you have to do between now and next Thursday, especially if you're pitching. So conveying the value proposition is super important. We talked a lot about that last week, so I'm not going to repeat, the storytelling, all that stuff. But keep in mind, right? Most people have an attention span of a few seconds. In our world, we're all bombarded with so much information every day. So you need to really be able to hone into what's essential about your business, what you do, what you're trying to solve. And of course, showing that your solution is innovative and unique, empathizing with your audience. Again, I think Ebony covered that really well last week. You really want to understand your audience, what challenges they're trying to solve, what they're trying to achieve, so you can put your solution, right, as the perfect match to helping them solve a need or, remove pain or enhancing it. And I really believe, even for nonprofits, that I think having a strong deck and a strong pitch really brings credibility. So I think people take you seriously. They're like, okay, they know what they are talking about. I feel confident that this team is going to do a great job, that, they're going to succeed. And I think that sometimes also the problem with nonprofits is it's a little bit more like, yeah, we're good. Again, like I said, we're good people. It's going to be great. Yes, but right, like how are you going to make this happen? So back to I hope it's not repetitive, but thinking again about the why, the what, and the how. So, yes.
Go back.
Yeah.
What do you mean by? What would be an example?
Yeah, perfect question. So I teach a class at UCI, sponsored by the National Science Foundation called ICORP, and it's all about customer discovery. So it's like helping researchers build their business model canvas. And I think a lot of challenges, especially when you start thinking about your company or your product in the sense of how you're going to solve something, you focus so much on how you're going to solve the problem versus, well, is your audience even facing that problem? What is, what is that their life? You all know the Maslow pyramid, right? So if I don't meet my basic need, don't even talk to me at that level up there because I can't even listen to what you're saying, right? So I'll give you an example. So there is actually an example in the course I give that's kind of fun, which is someone built a heating element that makes that they're going to put in a toaster to make your toast much faster, like twice faster. Right? And they're like, yeah, I'm going to make this product, sell it, and kill all the competition. But that didn't work because they didn't really understand the market, but more importantly, for people, saving 50% of the time on their toast in the morning wasn't really a big thing, and it wasn't worth the changing the product or paying more, whatever. However, when you do customer discovery, you go talk to people and you're going to say, hey, tell me about what happens in your house in the morning, right? So, no, a lot of you are, you're students, right? But let's say, you're thinking, well, I get up, have a bunch of kids to feed. I have to make their lunches. I got to get out of the house. I got to, or like you may say, oh, my alarm clock wakes me up. I can wake up. I don't want to go to class. It's too hard, but I need coffee to function, right? I know a lot of you, right, are probably thinking, I need my cup of coffee in the morning or I can do anything. So once you start talking to people at that level, you understand that, right, the most important thing probably in their morning routine is coffee, not toast. So that's what I mean by empathizing with your audience is, so, for example, the women's, I'm looking at Christine because they're, retreat, yoga, whatever thing, which I'm totally into. I'm like, I need a lot of those retreats. So, you will probably talk to potential customers like me and you say, hey, tell me, how would would you want to go on a retreat? What would that look like? What would be your main consideration? So I may say, well, there would be probably a budget consideration, like I can only afford that much, right? Or, I really want to go abroad because if I'm already going to do a woman retreat, may as well go see a different country, right? So you're kind of prompting a lot of these questions that are not related to your product, your service, or your technology at all, right? So because you're trying to understand your audience, and usually the most successful startups are really the ones who understand the customer the best and not the craziest technology out there, right? The build it and they'll come, right? As you know, it's usually doesn't happen that way. So you have to understand, like, there is a real, so that's what we mean by empathizing with customers is, there is a great book called Talking to Humans. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend it. It's all about this early stage, just talking to humans, basically, like going to ask people. We had a student, but he didn't come to the incubator. I think he's maybe an MBA student. I know does a lot of finance, but he wanted to build an app for men to schedule their barbershop appointment, right? And that's what I was telling him. I was like, you go to the barbershops in Long Beach, you go talk to these guys who work there, you go talk to the guys who go get their haircut, and you're going to find out a lot of things, right? And you don't ask them, would you use this app? No, you don't ask that. You ask, hey, how often do you go to the barber? How much do you pay for the barber? Like, what would, these kind of questions, right? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? It is, I think a lot of it is about design thinking. it's in the back, you know, so that much better than me, but so that's why you end up right talking about the why before you talk about the what and the how. Can tell you how many engineers I work with, and it's so humbling because these guys are like, they just invented the best satellite propulsion thing, right? And I'm like, next to them, I'm like, no idea what they, you know, but it doesn't matter because they still need to find a way to create the value proposition. Because when you go talk to an investor, almost no investors are going to have a PhD in rocket science, right? So you need to bring back whatever you're doing to, you know, like I say, a fifth grader level. And that's really important to get back to that level. I'm not gonna, yeah, this one is more about talking about the value proposition, but I think all of you probably have heard the elevator pitch. How do you make that pitch in an elevator? And I know sometimes I have people practice and I'm like, this is the elevator to the moon you're taking. But so it's also important. It's like, how do you introduce the organization? How do you make a connection with someone? And I think something that I didn't hear as much last week, and I think also important, is always having some kind of an ask. You know, I was thinking, it's like, I don't know why I was thinking about that, but it's like, if you have a love interest and you always talk to them like, hey, you know, I love how you, but you never ask like, can we go out together? Or can, you know, like, what's the point, right? So I think it's important in whatever you're doing to have some kind of an ask. It can be a soft ask. It can be like, hey, I love your feedback on this. It can be like, hey, I'm seeking to raise $200,000. Do you have any, you know, would you be interested in contributing? So it can be a very different type of ask, but I will always encourage you to have a clear ask for the person, because otherwise, if you're pitching to me and I'm like, oh, I love what you do, but if you're not asking anything, you'll be like, I don't know how I can help them. No idea, right? I don't know if they want money, what they want from me, if they want connection. So try to think, you know, what you want to leave the people with at the end when you're pitching to them. And because otherwise, right, it's probably unlikely you're going to get what you're looking for if you don't ask. I think that's a simple principle. So this is, again, maybe very practical, but usually I would say, you've seen this, but start with the problem you're trying to solve. And I will just repeat that for an impact company, whether it's social enterprise, again, even for nonprofits, if you can map out to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So, you know, I'm thinking about the team with the, I can't remember the name, but the store, right? That's like, you're doing a lot for the environment because you're not using reusable and better packaging, that kind of stuff. So, right, this is the problem. Solution is the what. This is how we're going to solve this problem and why it's unique and different. Target audience, market size. I think this was covered more than enough here. The revenue financial models. And then I'm going to introduce this in the next slides, but how do we build an impact logic model or something that, again, captures the essence of the impact we create and shows a potential investor or a future team member or a partner that you're really thinking more rationally about the impact, and you can have some ways to measure that impact. And then the rest you've seen it, you know, go to market, competition, team, ask. So does anybody know this? Have any of you ever been exposed to this? Impact logic model. So actually in nonprofits, I've seen various nonprofits use it, but I think this is great for also for profit social enterprise. The idea behind the impact logic model is actually, just like it says, creating a model that seems to be logical about the impact you're going to create. We start on this side usually, and we backtrack to build this. But on the right-hand side, you're already talking about the bigger impact you're creating. So some of you may have heard the expression big, hairy, audacious goal. We had, some organizations have, right? Like it could be as big as, you know, not removing, but like, yeah, not having hunger anymore, can be in a country, it can be in the world. That's like a really lofty impact, but something that's usually super big and that we don't expect to have very easy ways to measure, but it's what you're really aiming towards, right? So it could be, for example, that have 100% literacy in women in whatever area. That could be a really big impact, right? Now we're gonna go back and say, well, what would be the outcomes of whatever we do that will really lead to that impact? And usually outcomes is where we measure more. So outcomes are usually increasing, decreasing something. And I'm going to give an example that's very simple so that you understand too in the next slide. And so now going back to this side, the input, right, is kind of like in an organization, can be finance input, so labor, money, can be, the things that come into play, the organization, the activities, how are you carrying your mission towards the impact you're trying to reach? And from these activities, what are the outputs? So for example, if we're trying to not have, or to have 100% literacy for women in an area, we might, do class, like teaching them how to read, right? So the activity may be leading classes where we teach women to read. The outputs will be, well, this month we got 500 women in our classes, so 500 women have learned how to read. And so, right, the outcome, if it's, reducing the lack of literacy by, 50% or whatever, that's, so the idea behind this is that it's the logic, right, that by doing all these things, you're leading to the bigger impact. And that is also a good checkpoint for your organization, because you should really not conduct activities that are not going to lead to your impact, right? So I think that's also sometimes the scope creep that we see, whether it's, nonprofits or others, we're like, oh, we really should be doing this, or, we can give up that program, or, well, yes, actually you should, because it may not be directly, having an impact on the impact. But so yeah, I kind of went over the definitions, input activities, the outputs are the direct services product results from the activities, usually in numerical form, and the outcomes are really the changes you hope will result in all these benefits, right? And usually reported in comparative form, as I said, more or less, there are steps along the way to achieving the impact. So impact is the ultimate change, right? So I'm thinking again about, the store example, right? The impact could be that what you want is that there is no more, plastic trash bag used or whatever for, for people in Long Beach when they go shopping, or something really super lofty that you aim to in the end. This is a very simple example, which again, I want to make this simple. It's not, doesn't have to be super complicated. So this is an organization, actually, I know we are doing like books here, so that's perfect example. They want to have an increased level of education because that would be a positive economic impact. So again, fairly big lot of people. Right, their input is, they have buildings, they have books, they have librarians, they are going to do reading programs for children. So the output of those programs is children read more books and it improves their reading skills, right? And so on. So the outcomes are usually measured both quantitatively and qualitatively. So it can be, some of these measures can be legally like just, data that's gathered from the activities and the outputs, but some of it may also be more qualitative data, from surveys and others. So sometimes you have outcome measures where you're thinking, how am I going to measure that? Like things like satisfaction with services or programs. well, you may have to conduct surveys or interviews or so. It's fine too, to figure out, how you will measure. But it's, I think, critical to develop this kind of model. So if you pitch as an impact company, I strongly recommend you include an impact model, even as simple as the one I just showed you, but to show an impact investor or potential partner that you're really serious about an impact and how you're going to measure it, do activities that lead to it and so on. Go ahead.
And go
Yeah.
Or like output and output. Doesn't mean like more concise.
No, so the output is really, just kind of, it's not really just from the activity, what's coming out of the activity, right? So it's just, I would say, more basic data in a way. The outcome is really, it's almost getting to that impact you're trying to create. So if, and as I said, it would be more, so here I would, even want to qualify it a little bit better, that improve reading skills. So it would be, children, we'll talk about children here, have shown, or maybe 50% of the children in our community have shown improved reading skills. Now, the question will be, how can you measure that, right? So again, this might be by assessment, by a lot of different things, but that's more what an outcome sounds like. And then obviously the impact, again, is a much bigger thing. But the output is more like, we did 10 children program this month, and overall we had 1,000 children go through it. The output is just 1,000 children. See what I mean? So it's just the output of your activity.
So could we say that output is kind of like more quantitative, whereas outcome is like more qualitative?
In a certain way, yeah. Even though, outcome can also be measured sometimes quantitatively, but yeah, a little bit, yeah. But for example, I can say, from this incubator, the output is that every week we have on average 40, 50 students come. That's just an output. How many of students may end up, creating a startup? That could be, like we may want to have an outcome that's, hey, we want whatever business to start. So that's very different, right? So I know it's not obvious, I totally understand, but these are some questions to start. And I'm happy to talk to you either offline, or if you start drafting something and you're like, I don't know if that's the kind of thing I need to do, like, let me know and we'll work on that together. I understand, this doesn't happen overnight, and I've been playing with it so many times, right, that maybe some of these things are more obvious to me, but it's something, yeah, that I think the more you do it or start thinking about it, the more that would come naturally, like a lot of different models. So common pitfalls, and I talked a little bit about that, but when you pitch, do not focus on the, on why it's the best code that you just created or whatever, or the best satellite propulsion system is cool, but it's really about you need to focus on the bigger picture, and really what's super important is the value proposition, why the solution you're bringing is so unique, different, and it's really going to solve the problem in a way that maybe hasn't existed before. Yeah, so we built it and so they will come. I hear that all the time, like, this is the best stem cell, whatever technology. I'm like, great, I'm glad you just created this, it's amazing, but it's not going to sell itself, right? So how do you, who's your customer? How are you going to do this? That's what investors want to hear, or partners or others. And keep in mind, again, a lot of the people you're going to pitch to, they are not necessarily, they don't have your knowledge, they don't have your expertise. So you need to really make it simple to understand. Actually, one story, and I need to look into that story a little bit more, but I learned recently, or like earlier this year, that Zoom was apparently created in the 90s. Which I didn't know that, right? Some guy was telling me, oh, I was, working with Zoom. I'm like, what? But I think it's probably a perfect example of, the technology. Someone thought about this amazing technology back then. Cool. But we didn't need it as much, right? So finally COVID happened, and then suddenly everybody needs it. So I know I used GoToMeeting when I was younger and other things like that, but it wasn't obviously spread out like it is today. So yeah, it is another one. I don't know, all the judges that are gonna see your pitches, but I do personally, I'm not a big fan of lack of reality in terms of financials, especially. So some of you may have heard, right, the hockey stick, like suddenly in year 3, you're going to reach $100 million in sales. Not saying it's not possible at all, but I doubt it is. So think about, I think a lot of investors want to see how you think, you as a founder or as a team, they want to have that confidence that you know what you're talking about. You can, lead the company. And so it's not about trying to, sell crazy numbers. It's really about what seems realistic and ambitious at the same time, but really that you've been thinking through it. And I think you've all done this because this incubator is so thorough that you went through, the life plan and, all these different sessions, right? But there are a lot of startups I review every day. And I mean, it still blows my mind. I'm like, how can you show me this first? So I think, I better err on the side of, even vulnerability, if you need to say, hey, these numbers, I'm not 100% sure. I think we can make them, but, these are some of the maybe contingency or potential risks. That's completely fine, right? Because then you show yourself as a leader who understands that, things will happen in your company. And yes,
kind of answered it in the last sentence. So I was going to ask, like, if you don't show a hockey stick or some type of like profitability in the finance, then in my head it's like, oh, we're going to be very stale and stagnant for 2 years. Okay,
yeah,
that's not good. And it's like, oh, we're going to dip in the second year. Like, I'm trying to be realistic, but we're pitching, they don't really want to see that. So then I'm just trying to figure out like what's the best way to go about showing them, like, oh, we're going to be money. But back in my head, it's like some of these numbers are just kind of made up. It's, you don't know. But I think you answered it just what an honest and saying that.
I think it's like, like a lot of other things in life, where it's like, how hard do you want to bang your head against something versus finding the right person or the right thing, right? So I had actually, you all probably know Tech Cost Angels, which is an angel, local angel in group of investors. I have a lot of friends in Tech Cost Angels. Actually, Joe Platnik, who presented, is at Pasadena Angels, which I think is not Tech Cost Angels anymore. But I had this debate with some guys there because one time they had an impact company pitch. And this team was doing a reusable toothpaste that, is one of those monthly subscription. You get the toothpaste, but somehow it's good for the environment because you don't throw it away, right? You refill yours. So I was in love with this idea. I knew going in that there was no chance on earth Tech Cost Angels would even like that idea, right? I'm like, it's okay, you get to practice your pitch, fine. But that's what I know with a lot of investors, right? Like they are more obviously risk-driven and numbers-driven, which I think it's a mistake most of the time. Unfortunately, you can quite change a lot of these investors. So sometimes, right, it's frustrating because you may like, oh, it's not enough of a return or whatever. I'm like, it's okay, just move on. But because yes, I've seen people, it's like 30, where is my 30 time? I'm like, enough, right? Because I'm like, if we keep having the same conversations, honestly, nothing in the world is going to change. And that's a bigger problem. So that's, and I'm not afraid of telling these guys that because like, I believe in what we're trying to do in taking the world, but this is going to be same thing with job, right? When I was going into entrepreneurship, right? I had a long marketing career, and I would talk to people and I would say, I have a lot more skills than marketing. There are a lot of things I know how to do, I love to do. But you still have the people who be like, no, sorry, you're marketing. I'm like, fine, now it's like, okay, I'm gonna move on, right? And it's something I was kind of having that conversation with Christine earlier, which is, it took me a long time to get to that point, right, in my life where I'm like, sometimes you think you want to fight for something so hard, but trust me, you just should pass and then get to the next big thing, and it's going to be so much more amazing, whether it's, relationships, jobs. So that would be one thing, right? Tell younger people like you, it's like, and I think the investor crowd is changing a little bit. We're starting to see people with different backgrounds, more minorities, more women, and people who start thinking different and saying, look, again, like, it's not just a numbers game. It's not, how can we make these things work, helping these companies succeed and doing some great work and still finding our return, or still, so that's also been a little bit my learning. It's, if you're not talking to the right investor or the right people, let's find the right ones, right? And last year or the year before, I was invited by David Ochi, the kind of Wade's counterpart at Cal State Dominguez Hills, a good friend of mine, and he was doing an impact speech, so I was judging, and it was super cool. But we had these super heated debates among judges, because even what they classify as impact companies, I can get personally a little bit anal about it. So, it's like some people would tell me the medical device is an impact company. I'm like, and right, like you could say, oh, all medical innovation helps people, right? But again, it's going back more to the business and impact model and how you're really trying to create change, solving a bigger problem in the world. Because a lot of the medical companies, frankly, all they are trying to do is make money, right? Like saying, we want to sell our technology and make money, right? So even though they may bring a new medical innovation to market, it's not really breaking down the problem of, making, shareholders richer or whatever. So that's why I think when we talk about impact and around ESG too, which is not my expertise at all, but there's a lot of conversations, with Wall Street and everything, starting to put more regulations around ESG reporting, what that looks like, because of course, a lot of people are jumping on that train, trying to say, oh, we're a great company, we are, doing, impact and, yes, but, I think there will still be a gray part around what's really impact or not, but I think it has to be more than just, the product itself potentially, or, it can be, how you work, your culture in the company, your, your diversity and that kind of stuff. So hopefully that helps. And actually, I'm going to go to an example. Tools, I think, again, you probably are using that. So, Canva. I don't know what the requirements are for the pitch next week, but I'm assuming it's all like PowerPoint or slides or Canva, whatever you do. But I'm not the design expert here, but less is more on the side. Make the slides not busy, and so that the judges can focus on what you say versus reading your stuff. Right? And I'm not the best person at making slides, as you can tell. Okay, so I'm going to go through an example of a social enterprise that maybe will illustrate some of the things we say. So I worked with that founder and that company for almost 8 years. They are the first, I think he was the first founder I mentored at the UCI incubator, and he's been a good friend since. So he created a company called Cardena. Anthony is his name. So it's an innovative car donation platform to maximize charitable impact. So I won't be doing as good of a job as if Anthony was presenting, but I'm going to do my best. So what's the problem? And some of you may not know this, but hundreds of thousands of vehicles are donated to charitable causes every year, but rarely can you pick the charity you give to. So if, let's say your grandparent passes away and you have an old car and you're like, I'm going to give it away. So usually if you go through Cars for Kids or others, you can say, oh, I want my car and that money to go to Cancer Society or whatever. You won't have that option. And actually, they only receive 15 or 20% of the actual sale of the car. And you really have no idea as a donor how much money really goes where. So here is a solution. Cardena is a charitable car donation platform, and it is a for-profit social enterprise leveraging technology and key partners to deliver a significant source of income to all charities. So this is the solution right here. What we solve for, so this is kind of like the what, democratization of car donations, a huge increase in donation volume because we are giving back more money to the charities, and much more transparency and trust, really much in line with sustainable cities and communities and partnerships of the goals from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the opportunity is that we are going to have a lot of exposure to potential donors, also with partnerships like GoFundMe, TechSoup, PayPal, which could bring a lot of extra donations, because these partners are going to promote car donation on their platform when people go there. The market opportunity, so you all recognize the slides, right? The TAM Samsung. I'm not going to go very deep on this, but this is the competition. So as you see, most of the current car donation organizations provide very low return to the charity and don't really work in favor of the donor to show you, give you an option of where you want to give your car, but also show you how much money is really going to them. So how it works is that we built, right? Each charity or nonprofit can build their platform and promote it to their audience, saying, hey, you want to donate a car, you can do it with us. And building a platform that will easily allow you to enter the information, which organization you want to give to, and having a dashboard to really show you that in the end, your organization is going to get most of the donation of your car. All right. So the business model is really, right, that on the average donated value, we take a 20% fee, and then there's some operations, but really the average that goes to the charity is 85% of the original price of the car, which is pretty amazing. And this is the impact model, which is not looking very fancy, but so the input here, the platform is obviously an input of what we need to have as infrastructure, the team. Kelly Blue Book is kind of also something needed to understand the value of the card. PayPal Giving Fund, GoFundMe. The activity is using technology to manage, onboard, and process donations, doing joint promotion with some of our partners, charities, and using AI to estimate the donation values. So outputs, we have lower cost efficient process, easy and free onboarding process, disclosure of all related facts, specific calculation of individual donation impact. A lot of them are coming from that technology and the platform. And so in terms of outcomes, we see increased margins on donated cars, that charities also now have a new potential source of revenue, or these donations coming from cars, charitable vehicle donation process is transparent. And so the impact, right, is, really actually a lot of it is about partnership, because we're helping other nonprofit organizations increase their impact. This is actually a little bit, but anyway, so, and now we're adding that we have started, right, we have a minimum viable product that some organizations are already on board. A lot are Southern California based. And all charities have remained, once they start working with Cardena, they are very happy and stay around. Now the ask, so the time, right, the ask was $2 million raise in terms of bringing more people to the team, expanding the partners, and making sure, right, we refine the product, as well as also some IP costs in terms of securing our intellectual property and making sure that whatever we build is gonna be protected. This is the team, again, I'm not, just to show you an idea, right? And that's it. So this was just an example I wanted to show you, because even though it's almost just like a pitch for a for-profit startup, I think, right, like there's a few tweaks that make it a little bit more about impact. And even if you are a nonprofit, I would, you know, I've worked with nonprofits on building decks like this also, where they really are a little bit more business driven and showing, right, making a case for what they do. Anyway, so this is what all I have so far. So a lot of info, but let's have a conversation. I can answer your questions or anything, or even about if you have questions about pitching in general, or about, you know, anything I talked about, or anything that is on your mind. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Said in your presentation,
The value proposition. So I mean, obviously the product is linked to the value proposition, but it's more about the value than I think the product itself. Remind me, what does your team do? It's the what? Oh yes, I was just looking at it earlier because I was like, oh, I forgot how cool that looks like. Yeah, so in this case, you know, it's kind of like, hey, experience the spa from anywhere, you know, from the comfort of your house at a cheaper price, whatever, kind of making this up, but right, yes, it's still about a virtual spa experience, but why, you know, so what you wouldn't want to focus on is like, oh, you know, we have these amazing glasses that, you know, are like whatever, you know, or like, you know, the image is like 4K or whatever, like I have no idea, but you know what I mean? Like, that's not high, right? That's what I mean by it's not about the product. It's more about the experience and what you're really bringing. If that makes sense. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
So you mentioned like people coming through with medical devices, like that's not a social impact thing. I'm like, if you're going for a nonprofit, then that's capital intensive.
Oh, are those two different questions?
No, it's the same question, but I'm like, if you're like if you're a nonprofit and you go that route, then you need to be less capital intensive because it's like harder to raise capital, and that's why you're saying that if you're like a medical device, then you're like just solely, most of the time you're dependent upon like raising capital. So you.
Oh, I see what. Okay, I get the question. So, well, first of all, a medical device you probably wouldn't be a nonprofit anyway, because probably want to be, I mean, generating a lot of, unless you have a model like you charge some people to use the device and or something. But yeah, it's not that you have to be less capital intensive, because some nonprofits, they raise millions of dollars every year, right? So they get access to a lot of money. But I think the challenge is for a nonprofit to get there. In my mind, it's a lot of effort. I've had that debate, actually a very heated debate with the head of the USC social enterprise lab. I don't know what it is with USC people sometimes, but oh my God, they are like, like, oh my God. So I respect him very much, but in his opinion, right, it's, if you're a nonprofit, it's hard to get donation, but if you're a for-profit, you're also hard to sell. In my personal opinion, a selling process is more predictable than a grant or donation process, but that's my opinion. And what I mean by that is I think if you really figure out your sales process, you know, your customers, your value proposition, I think your chances of success are high. Honestly, the nonprofit world, I've been in it for over, you know, almost 20 years. It's still very random to me. Like sometimes you get the grant, you don't. I mean, it's hard. Now you can be very lucky, start getting a big organization to support you and again give you hundreds and, you know, thousands of dollars every year. But that's why I would usually recommend to explore at least a mix of two, or, you know, also having a for-profit arm, because you can solve some of your, you know, financial issues or access to capital in a different way. And I think also the timeline, right? So, because even for some grants, so one of the things I faced is in a nonprofit organization, some organizations won't even grant you until you're 3 years old already. Basic criteria, you have to be 3 years in existence, right? Some of them want to see some kind of track record, right? So it's, you know, a lot of it is really building those relationships, planting a seed, and then, you know, eventually getting somewhere. But if you're looking at more of a business process, right, it's like, well, there is a need, someone needs your product or wants your service, you can sell tomorrow, right? So this, you know, it's, I think, just two different approaches, but anyway, I hope that answers you. Yes?
So can you actually legally be a mission over corporation without getting?
Yes, so they are, and you know, I'm not a lawyer in this, but there are different structures. So one, for example, also is, you know, in California, there is a PBC, Public Benefit Corporation. That's actually a legal entity, right? So as a sole enterprise, you can be that for profit. On the nonprofit side, there are at some point limitations on how much revenue you can generate and how it's distributed. And I don't know all these details, but I think it's fairly, you know, fairly high. And so also some companies build both entities, right? Where you have a for-profit and nonprofit. There is a designation that's called LC3 or something. I always forget the name, but that allows nonprofit to also bring a lot of revenue. And it's still like legally, it's still fine. In Orange County, there is an organization that I worked with. They have a catering company that's for profit, and then they have a nonprofit where they teach women rescued from trafficking kitchen skills that they eventually hire in the catering company. So that's also a great way, right, to have both going on, where you're still doing mission and helping, attracting grants and others in the nonprofit, but you're still running a business and making money. There are definitely legal and tax implications that need to be reviewed, but you know, I work with lawyers and tax experts, and you know, on case by case to make sure everything seems fine. But it's actually, I think, you know, it's less problematic than I think most people think it is. Let's put it that way.
Even if you're a public corporation?
If you're a public corporation, I'm not sure. You mean like publicly traded? Yeah, that is, I don't know.
You made a reference earlier of a mission-oriented company that was not publicly traded. That was the subject of a hostile takeover of a larger corporation that did not share their values, and they tried to bring shareholders. In that case, was Ben and Jerry. So Ben and Jerry.
Oh yeah.
Whoever they didn't want to sell, so they turned down.
Yeah.
They tried to prevent the hostile takeover. So what they did, instead, it was too late for Ben and Jerry. As far as I understand it, the Public Benefit Corporation came about as a result of that. So that a mission-oriented company could be publicly traded, but still within their charter, say the mission the mission is more important than profit. So you can operate as a corporation, trade on our first obligations, shareholders.
That's a great example, yeah. And Unilever has actually had some few examples of really bad management in terms of impact, where their CEO was like, I mean, yeah. So this is this is a great example. Also, some of you may have heard about B Corps. So B Corp is not a legal entity, because I've had that question. Some people like, oh, should we incorporate as a B Corp? So there is no such thing as a B Corp as a legal entity, but B Corp is a certification that is supposed to be more social enterprise-like for companies. Patagonia, Tom, they all have that. I know some small businesses and companies that also have that. It's nice because it gives you potentially the credibility or that branding. However, some of the challenges for smaller companies is the reporting and the actual credentialing process and maintaining the B Corp credential and what it entails in terms of reporting. Again, I'm not an expert at this. I haven't done that myself. I think it's not impossible, but that's why some companies don't go for it right away, because you may need an extra resource or something to actually be a B Corp. But that's what the closest we have in terms of maybe recognition of, a stamp for saying this is definitely like a social enterprise type of company, right? And if you go to the B Corp website, they list all their B Corps. So, there's some cool companies there for sure. Other questions? Yeah, I haven't, or I hope that, one step closer to you pitching or something, but yeah, I'm excited to see what happens next week. And yeah, I was going to make an announcement. If some of you, I know Wade told most of you that we have some practice sessions next Monday, but if you want to connect, I can make myself available on Zoom tomorrow, Thursday, or Friday. If any of you have questions or pricing things that you want to address, I'm happy to do that. So I hope I didn't kill all your hopes about nonprofits. Yes. My email is isabelle.bart@CSULB. I'm also on the Institute website if you can find me. You probably have my email there. Bye, Steve. Yeah. Great.